There was a brutal incident at Halona Blowhole on June 30, 2002, involving 18-year-old Daniel Dick, who was vacationing in Hawaii with his mother and two younger brothers. Daniel had just graduated as the student body president from his high school in Los Angeles, and was preparing to attend California State University in the fall. He was an upstanding young man, whose future, as people would say, was brighter than the sun, and even before this trip, he had been working part-time at a grocery store. That morning, Daniel headed down to the beach, intending to swim and soak up some sun. Soon, he met three girls, and, after about 30 minutes of chatting, the ridiculous idea came to him, and he foolishly suggested they climb over the fence to check out the blowhole. A blowhole is a narrow hole on the rocks near the crashing waves, formed by molten lava, one that connects to a tunnel that leads to the water, causing waves to shoot up through the hole in a spectacular geyser. Now, I don't know if they didn't teach this in science class, but while the blowhole could look extremely fascinating from a distance, there are few things as dangerous as it when up close. The beach Daniel and the girls were on was near the notoriously dangerous Halona Blowhole. The tunnel connected to some of the most turbulent waters in Hawaii, causing waves to rocket 30+ feet into the air. To ensure safety, a fence and warning signs were placed around the blowhole, emphasizing the need to keep a distance due to the powerful water surging through the tunnel. Standing safely behind the fence, you could feel the ground tremble as the waves rumbled through the tunnel and exploded out of the blowhole. Daniel's family and friends described him as adventurous rather than reckless, always eager to experience new things. But this decision to want to see the blowhole was suicidal. Yes, the blowhole intrigued him, and he couldn't resist the urge to get up close and personal with it. Despite warnings from the girls, Daniel insisted on feeling the power of the water hitting him in the chest. Determined, Daniel headed towards the rocks, passing a couple enjoying their time on the beach. He waved at them, climbed up the rocks, and scaled the fence, timing it perfectly. He waited for a geyser to shoot up and subside before positioning himself over the edge of the hole, hovering his chest just above where the water would surge. The first wave shot up, hitting Daniel in the chest and staggering him. The girls and the couple yelled at him to move away, but Daniel was resolute in this idiocracy. He moved again, leaning back over the blowhole just as a massive wave barreled through the tunnel. The water erupted, lifting him 5 feet into the air and flipping him upside down. I cannot begin to imagine the fear on the faces of the girls and the couple. And then it happened. Daniel fell headfirst into the blowhole, his body forming a perfect dive. The narrow opening of the blowhole extended down 8 feet before widening into a cavernous space, like the inside of a teapot, filled with violent, churning water. This section connected to an underground tunnel leading out to the sea, and this was the deal breaker. Once inside, there was no way back up. The narrow opening provided no grip, and the force required to push oneself out was insurmountable. The only possible escape was through the underwater tunnel, constantly pounded by waves. Swimming through this tunnel was nearly impossible, as the waves would push back or trap anyone attempting the journey. Daniel's fate was sealed, as he was forced into the cavern, with zero to no chance of resurfacing. As soon as Daniel vanished into the blowhole, the couple and the three girls scrambled up the rocks, jumped over the fence, and peered into the tunnel, desperately calling his name. They shouted for others on the beach to call 911. Each time a wave surged through the tunnel, they felt the ground shake and knew that if Daniel were still alive, he was being submerged for around 30 seconds with each wave. By the time the police arrived, Daniel had been trapped in the blowhole for some time, with no signs of life or sound from him. The situation looked increasingly bleak. The authorities declared it nearly impossible for anyone to survive inside the blowhole, especially at high tide, which was when Daniel had fallen in. The police explained they couldn't send divers until low tide because the conditions inside the blowhole were too dangerous. The best they could do was drop a weighted line into the blowhole, anchored on the outside, in the hope that if Daniel was somehow still alive, he could grab the line and hold on until rescuers could reach him. However, pulling himself through the narrow opening to safety was unlikely. The next day, during low tide, divers went into the water and found Daniel's body floating near the entrance where the water gets sucked into the tunnel and out through the blowhole. It seemed he had been pulled back out through the tunnel to the sea. It remained unclear how long Daniel had survived after falling into the blowhole, or if he had attempted to swim through the tunnel, but ultimately he drowned. In the aftermath, Daniel's mother petitioned for a metal grate to be placed over the blowhole to prevent future accidents. However, this proposal faced opposition from locals who argued that the issue was not the blowhole itself, but rather people failing to respect the power of nature. While the fence around Halona Blowhole remains, warning people to keep their distance, the entrance to the blowhole itself is still uncovered. This incident serves as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurk in nature's most fascinating features, and also a warning that there is only but a thin line between adventurousness and recklessness. In this case, it was nothing more than youthful recklessness. The next incident is even more gruesome and sad. Despite numerous warnings, Darren Spivey took his 15-year-old son, Dylan, to one of the most dangerous caves ever known to man. Sadly, the frigid depths would ultimately claim their lives in a desperate struggle for air. In 2014, Darren Spivey, a 35-year-old avid scuba diver, wanted to share his love for diving with his son, so on Christmas Eve, Darren gave Dylan scuba tanks as an early present. They were both eager to use them, discussing and intensely planning a dive for the next morning. On Christmas morning, the father and son woke up after struggling to sleep due to the excitement, and they headed straight to a local dive site, only to find the gate locked. Determined, Darren decided to take them to another dive site in Central Florida, within a wildlife management area, open 24/7 to hunters, hikers, and divers. The pair drove to the park entrance, and were beyond happy to find out that it was indeed open. They exited the car, put on their wetsuits and scuba gear, and waddled over to a wooden walkway that extended from the parking lot out onto a pond like a dock. As they walked, they passed numerous signs warning against diving in this pond unless they were expert divers. Just imagine. This was the second sign from God telling them that today was definitely not the day for diving. First, the dive area they wanted to enter was locked, and now this one had a serious warning. This seemingly tranquil pond was the entrance to the infamous and deadly Eagle's Nest, known in the cave diving community as the Mount Everest of cave diving. At the bottom of the placid pond lay a narrow hole, the entrance to a tunnel that descended straight down. This was the only way in or out of a massive underwater cave system. Expert divers would grab the guideline leading into the cave and follow it down until the light above faded, leaving only black nothingness below. At the end of the tunnel, the space opened into a massive chasm called the ballroom. In the ballroom, even the most powerful flashlight couldn't reveal the walls, making it feel like being in outer space. The guideline continued straight down to the bottom of the ballroom, around 130 feet deep, where a sign with a grim reaper warned, "Stop, prevent your own death. Do not go any further. There's nothing in this cave worth dying for." This sign marked the last easy chance to turn around and return to the surface. Beyond the sign, the cave branched into two directions, with the tunnels becoming narrower and more evil, pardon my choice of words, descending to depths of 300 feet. Even for experienced divers, this area was extremely dangerous. A current flowed through Eagle's Nest, and losing the guideline could result in being swept away and lost in the pitch-black cave, making it nearly impossible to find the way out. Many divers had died attempting these dives, as small mistakes at such depths could be fatal. The warning sign aimed to prevent further tragedies. Yet, as Darren and Dylan stood at the end of the walkway, ready to jump into the pond, they were unfazed by the warnings. Neither of them were expert divers. In fact, Dylan wasn't even certified. Before they jumped into the water, Darren texted his fiancée, saying they were at Eagle's Nest and about to dive, promising to call when they resurfaced. Then, he put his phone away, and they both plunged into the water, swimming towards the entrance of Eagle's Nest. Hours passed with no call from Darren. As the sun began to set, Darren's fiancée, growing worried, decided to check on them. She drove to the parking lot at Eagle's Nest. She spotted Darren's car, but saw no sign of the boys. Alarmed, she called the police. Soon, professional divers arrived at Eagle's Nest to search for Darren and Dylan. The divers entered the water, swam to the narrow entrance, and descended the tunnel into the ballroom. Holding the guideline, they scanned the ceiling with their flashlights, knowing that bodies were often found near the entrance in cave diving accidents. Their lights fell on Dylan's lifeless body, trapped against the ceiling just 6 feet from the entrance. His emergency flotation devices had inflated, his mouthpiece was out, and his tanks were empty. The divers retrieved Dylan's body and returned to Eagle's Nest, following the guideline down to the bottom of the ballroom. There, they found Darren lying on a sandy hill, his mouthpiece out, his tanks also empty. He was next to the infamous sign with the Grim Reaper that read, "Stop, prevent your own death, don't go any farther." Both Darren's and Dylan's gauges indicated they had descended to 230 feet. To put this in perspective, recreational diving ranges from 0 to 130 feet, where divers can use regular air and require minimal training. Below 130 feet, divers need special gas mixes, advanced equipment, and extensive training, all of which Darren and Dylan lacked. An investigation into their deaths concluded it was a tragic accident. The prevailing theory is that Darren and Dylan entered the ballroom ballroom, descended to the bottom, and ventured into one of the 2 tunnels branching off. They reached a depth of 230 feet, where they likely experienced nitrogen narcosis, a state akin to drunkenness. In their impaired condition, they probably lost track of time and their air supply. When they returned to the ballroom to ascend, they had run out of air. Dylan likely ran out first, showed his father his empty gauge, and Darren, seeing this, gave his son his regulator to share air. As they ascended together, Darren's tanks also emptied. He lost consciousness and sank to the bottom. Dylan, managing to get a full breath, tried desperately to swim to the surface. He inflated his emergency flotation devices to rise faster, but in his panic, lost hold of the guideline. He swam up, hit the ceiling, and unable to find the exit, drowned. Despite all the warnings, both outside and within the cave, cautioning inexperienced divers to stay away, Eagle's Nest continues to lure divers. To date, 11 people have perished in its depths.